I was halfway through sipping my evening tea when I heard it. He's just a living corpse, eating and sleeping in our house. My daughter's voice, sharp and casual, sliced through the wooden door like a knife. The tea turned bitter on my tongue, the steam suddenly smelled like ash. I stood there, cup trembling in my hand, heart heavier than my years. They thought I couldn't hear. But I did. And from that moment, something inside me began to rot, or perhaps, awakened that I wasn't always this bent old man moving slowly through creaking corridors. Once, I stood straight, chest out, hands calloused from honest work. I used to come home with sweat on my back and pride in my heart. Not because I made millions, I didn't, but because every naira I brought home was clean, earned with dignity. I was a teacher. 38 years of chalk dust, worn shoes, and hungry students who became doctors, engineers, and, ironically, some of them now teach my grandchildren. I built this house brick by brick. Not with my hands, but with the paychecks I never once used on myself. My wife, God rest her soul, used to say, "We're not building a house, we're building a future." And I believed her. We raised our children with discipline, yes, but also with laughter and love. I taught them to read under the flicker of kerosene lanterns when NEPA would fail us. I told them stories about our ancestors so they would know pride. I skipped my meals so they wouldn't go to school hungry. Shoes worn out? I'd patch them. School trip too expensive? I'd borrow quietly. When their mother passed away, I died a little too. She had been the soft to my stern, the warmth in our home. I carried on alone, because that's what fathers do. That's what men of my generation believed: you carry until you collapse. You give until you vanish. My oldest son, Chuka, was the first to graduate. I sold the last portion of my father's farmland to pay his final year fees. He never knew. I didn't want thanks. Just to see him wear that gown, smile for the camera, call me Baba, with pride, that was payment enough. And for a while, they did call me that with pride. Baba. Papa. The man who never said no, even when he had nothing left to give. The shift came slowly. A silence when I walked into rooms. Fewer calls, fewer visits. They were building lives, I told myself. That's what children do. We raise them to fly, even if they fly away from us. But then came the little humiliations. They stopped asking me for advice. My youngest daughter once said, "Baba, that's old thinking," when I warned her about borrowing from friends. Old thinking. Was I outdated now? Expired like medicine no longer fit for use? Still, I stayed silent. I remember one rainy night, the kind that drums against the roof like ancestral whispers, I woke up shivering. The power was out. I reached for the extra blanket but couldn't find it. Later, I learned my grandson had taken it to make a fort in the living room. Nobody thought to return it. I lay there, teeth chattering, staring at the ceiling. Was I invisible now? These weren't strangers. These were my blood. My children. And yet, I was becoming something less than a person in their eyes, an object that consumes, but gives nothing. A burden. And the cruelest part? I still loved them. I still prayed for them, even as they forgot my name in their morning routines. I still smiled when they succeeded, even as they no longer shared their victories with me. I held on to memories like lifelines: my daughter's first steps, my son's first letter from university, my wife humming in the kitchen. Those were the pieces of myself I clutched in the quiet. But the silence was becoming unbearable. And now, after what I overheard, after being called a living corpse, I began to wonder, had I truly become that? Or was it them who had died inside? Something told me this silence wouldn't last much longer. Something inside me, something long buried, was starting to stir. The first real betrayal wasn't loud. It came in whispers and forgotten acknowledgments. It happened on my birthday, my 68th. I remember because I had taken my time that morning, slowly shaving, even polishing my old wristwatch. I wanted to look decent, not like some old man waiting for death. I sat in the parlor from morning till dusk, listening for footsteps, laughter, a knock on the door. Anything. Nothing came. No calls. No messages. Not even from Chuka, the one who used to write poems for me in primary school. The one who cried when I left him in boarding school for the first time. I waited until 8:37 p.m. The silence in the house was deafening. I reheated the leftover jollof rice from 2 days ago and sat by myself, eating with the television on mute. A candle flickered beside me, mocking the celebration that never came. The next morning, my middle daughter, Adiz, came by. Not to greet me, but to collect the car documents. Her own car had developed a fault and she needed mine for just a few days. She didn't ask how I spent my birthday. She didn't notice the deflated balloon I had bought for myself still floating weakly in the corner. She didn't ask if I was okay. I handed her the keys and said nothing. Not out of fear, but because my throat was thick with something heavier than sadness. A mix of shame and confusion. Was this the girl who used to braid my hair while laughing? The same one who once made a Father's Day card from cardboard and glitter? She drove off. I watched the taillights disappear down the road I had tarred with my own savings back when the neighborhood was just bush and gravel. The following week, I overheard her telling someone on the phone, "Baba doesn't need the car. He barely leaves the house anymore." That was the moment. That sentence. That's when the weight landed on me like a falling roof. They saw me as a ghost, something that remained but no longer mattered. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, staring out into the night, hearing only the occasional bark of stray dogs. The same streets I once patrolled during community watch now felt foreign. The same children I once protected from harm now left me unguarded from emotional wounds. Was I still a father? Or just a fixture in the background of their lives? I thought of the time I gave up a promotion just to stay close to home while my wife was ill. Of the times I lied to my own stomach so theirs would be full. And yet, they had no space in their lives for me anymore. Not even for my birthday. Still, I said nothing. Still, I smiled when Adiz returned the car a week later, barely washed, fuel tank empty. Still, I pretended I didn't know about the spa day she enjoyed that same week, the one she posted on her social media, smiling with cucumber slices over her eyes. But something inside me had started to shift. A small, quiet defiance. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't confront her. But I started watching more carefully. Listening more deeply. Recording in my heart what my children no longer said out loud. It was the beginning of my awakening. Have you ever been quietly forgotten by the very people you once sacrificed everything for? If that silence ever cut deeper than words, stay with me, this story isn't over. It was during Harmattan. The air was dry, and the wind carried that dusty scent of old wood and brittle leaves. I had taken out the old metal trunk from beneath my bed, the one where I kept letters, documents, photographs, pension slips, the pieces of my life that still felt real. I found Chuka's school admission letter there, dated 1999. My hands trembled slightly as I ran my fingers over it. I remembered how I borrowed money from my cooperative society to pay that first school fee. For 3 years, I ate dry Gary in the staff room so I could pay back that loan. Next to it was Adiz's wedding invitation. The wedding I paid for. The gown, the venue, even the drinks. She and her husband promised they'd pay me back when they were settled. It's been 11 years. They now drive matching SUVs. As I flipped through document after document, a sick realization settled into my chest. I existed only in ink and faded receipts to them. My entire legacy, every sacrifice, was buried beneath their comforts, and forgotten the moment it no longer served them. A few weeks later, the true insult arrived. It came in the form of a bank form, accidentally left on the dining table. My youngest son, Ibuka, had come by to use my utility bill to register for a loan. That wasn't unusual, he often used my name and documents for things. But this time, I read it. I wish I hadn't. Under the Section 4, Dependents, he had written, none. And under, Supporters, he had listed himself. Himself. No mention of me. No mention of his mother's inheritance I had split with him when he turned 25. No record of the months I helped him pay rent when he lost his first job. On paper, I was already dead. I sat down slowly. The chair creaked beneath my weight. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. None? I was nobody now. Not even a footnote. Later that evening, I asked him about it, softly, cautiously. Ibuka, why did you write that you have no dependents? What about me? He laughed. Laughed. Ah, Baba, it's just paperwork. You know how these banks are. It's not deep. But it was deep. Deeper than he could ever know. Because for the first time, I realized the truth, they didn't just forget me. They had erased me. I was a ghost floating in their lives, visible only when they needed something. And when I wasn't useful, I disappeared completely. They only remembered I existed when bills were due, when loans were needed, when documents required a next of kin to fill in. A few days after that, I went to the local government office and updated my own paperwork. Quietly, without telling anyone. I removed their names from my pension beneficiary forms. Changed my will. Moved a small amount into a separate account, under my own name alone. It wasn't revenge. It was a declaration. A quiet, firm one. I am not dead. Not yet. And I was done letting them treat me like I was. That night, I burned the copy of Ibuka's form in my backyard. The wind scattered the ashes across the soil I once planted cassava in. I watched the paper curl and blacken, the word none turning into a smear of smoke. That was the moment I began to reclaim myself, not loudly, not with drama. But with the slow, steady hand of a man who had finally opened his eyes. It was a Sunday, those used to be my favorite days. Back when the house rang with laughter, pots clanged in the kitchen, and grandchildren ran barefoot across the veranda chasing each other. But this Sunday was different. Quiet. Too quiet. Adiz had invited the whole family for lunch. I wasn't told until the morning of. She said it casually, while passing by my door, Baba, we're having people over today. Hope you don't mind staying in your room a bit? Not even a proper invitation. Not even a glance to see if I smiled or frowned. Still, I got dressed. Carefully. I ironed my shirt, the one with the blue embroidery that my late wife used to say made me look like a chief. I even polished my shoes, though no one would notice. My knees ached, but I walked to the dining area by myself, hoping, maybe foolishly, that they had set a place for me. They hadn't. The long table was full, of food, laughter, and people I once carried on my back. Chuka was pouring wine for his wife. Ibuka was showing off pictures from his latest business trip. My grandson sat on a tablet, face buried, not even looking up to greet me. I stood at the edge, waiting. Watching. Adiz finally looked up, surprised. Oh. Baba, you're out, she said, as if I were a stray pet that wandered in. She waved at the maid. Can you fix Baba a plate? Not a seat. A plate. I sat in the corner on a low stool they dragged from the back of the house. My food came on a tray, cold rice, no meat, and a glass of water without ice. I could still hear them laughing as I chewed, slowly, trying not to choke on the bitterness. Halfway through, my granddaughter looked at me and asked, "Why does Baba still live here? Don't old people go to old people homes?" The room went silent for a second. Then Chuka chuckled. Baba likes it here. He's stubborn. Stubborn. That's what they call endurance now. I left the plate half full and walked outside. The sun had started to set, painting everything in gold and sorrow. I sat on the front steps, the same ones I once repaired with my bare hands. My back ached, my hands trembled slightly, but my mind was clearer than it had been in years. They didn't forget my place in their lives. They removed it. I wasn't a father anymore. I was an obligation. A background character in their well-curated lives. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, replaying everything, the missed birthday, the cold food, the erased name on the loan form, the granddaughter's innocent question. That was the moment. The final nail. The part of me that kept hoping for their warmth, their gratitude, their kindness, died quietly that night. No screaming. No drama. Just silence. But in its place, something else was born. Not hatred. Not revenge. Resolve. If they saw me as a burden, I would show them the weight of everything they owed. Not in anger. But in truth. I would no longer suffer with a smile. I would no longer offer comfort in exchange for crumbs of respect. They would soon learn that I was not just a man who gave. I was the foundation they built their comfort on. And foundations, though silent, hold everything up, until they choose not to. After that Sunday, I stopped trying to be seen. It was easier, really. I became a ghost in my own home, silent, present, but invisible to the ones who once called me Baba with joy in their voices. But if they thought I had faded into the background, they were wrong. I had simply begun to observe. Every conversation, every slip of the tongue, every careless request, they didn't know I was listening. They thought my silence was weakness. In truth, it gave me clarity. One afternoon, while Ibuka boasted on the phone about a new contract he needed capital for, I quietly pulled out an old exercise book. The same kind I once used to mark students' essays. Page by page, I began to write. Not stories. Not thoughts. Figures. Dates. Amounts. Names. The tuition fees, the wedding payments, the hospital bills, the car loans. The rent I covered, the businesses I funded, the things they borrowed with casual promises of, "I'll pay you back, Baba." All of it, documented. Not to shame them. But to remind myself of the truth. Because for too long, I had allowed my memory to be gaslit by their indifference. For too long, I told myself they must have forgotten. No. They remembered when it suited them. They just chose not to value it. That evening, I walked to the bank, slowly, cane in hand, each step deliberate. I opened a private savings account under my own name. I didn't tell anyone. I transferred a small portion of my pension into it, just enough to separate my giving from my living. I also asked about loans, investment options. The young banker was surprised. "Sir, what are you planning?" I smiled. "Just making sure I'm not dead before I die." Back home, I reached out to an old colleague, Emeka. We had taught together in the 80s. He had retired into quiet consultancy and still wore his loyalty like an old sweater. Over 2 cups of tea, I told him my plan. He listened without interruption. Then he nodded. "You don't need revenge, old friend. You need records." So he helped me draft formal IOUs, documents that turned favors into debts, and kindness into contracts. I copied them into that same exercise book. It felt strange, and freeing. I started locking my room at night. I began attending community meetings again. The neighborhood youths looked surprised to see me walk into the hall one Saturday, wearing my old blazer. "Baba Chuka. You're still strong," they said. Stronger than you think, I wanted to reply. During those meetings, I made new connections, lawyers, small business owners, retirees like me who were also being sidelined by the very people they raised. One man told me, old age isn't death. It's just silence waiting to be broken. That line stuck with me. One day, Adiz asked me to co-sign a lease document for her husband's business expansion. I looked her in the eye and said, "Let me review it first." She blinked. Confused. "Baba, it's just paperwork." "No," I said calmly. "It's my signature. That's worth more than paper." She left without pressing further. She was learning. At night, I would sit in the dark, staring at the ceiling, not in sorrow, but in strategy. I was no longer begging to be loved. I was reclaiming what I gave, one quiet move at a time. They still didn't see it. Not yet. They thought the ghost in the house was harmless. But this ghost had a ledger, a bank account, and a plan. And soon, they would understand exactly who they had taken for granted. They didn't notice it at first. The change. The weight of my silence had always been mistaken for passivity, so when I began to shift, just slightly, they blinked but didn't react. But I saw it. The way Chuka paused when I asked for a signed receipt after I lent him, just a small amount, to pay a delivery company. The way Adiz tilted her head when I refused to be rushed through signing a form she brought to my room. These were small ripples. But even the ocean starts as a whisper. I started asking questions. Not aggressively. Just enough to shake their confidence. Which date exactly will you return this money? Is there a written agreement? I need a copy of the business plan. You would have thought I'd cursed at them. They shifted in their seats. Looked at each other like I was malfunctioning. But I was just waking up. One night, during dinner, yes, now I insisted on sitting at the table again, I brought out a small folder and placed it beside my plate. The conversation froze. I didn't say a word. I just ate slowly, like the man I used to be. Finally, Chuka asked, "What's that, Baba?" I looked up. Calm. Just some records. Things I've given. Things I'm owed. I went back to eating. The silence returned, heavier now. Dense. Later that week, Ibuka came to ask for N200,000 for a business emergency. He smiled like he used to as a boy, charming, persuasive. He even called me Baba Mi, a name I hadn't heard in years. I smiled too. Then I handed him a form. "What's this?" he asked. "A loan agreement," I said, gently. "You can sign it if you're serious." He laughed, unsure if I was joking. But I wasn't. They called a family meeting 2 days later. Not to check on my health. Not to ask about the folder or the forms. But to accuse me. "Baba," Adiz said, her voice full of hurt that didn't belong to her, "you've changed. You're making everything transactional. We're family." I looked at her, then at the others. "Ah," I said. "Now you remember we're family. But where was that family when I spent my birthday alone? Where was it when I ate cold rice on a stool in my own house?" No one answered. "I am not turning bitter," I continued. "I am turning clear." They didn't shout. They didn't storm out. But their silence this time, it wasn't the same. It wasn't dismissal. It was discomfort. I saw it in their eyes. For the first time in years, they were seeing me again. Not as a burden. Not as a background figure. But as a man. And the truth is, I wasn't haunting them out of revenge. I was haunting them with their own reflection. With the ledger of their forgetfulness. With the quiet dignity they trampled thinking it would never rise. Now, when they enter my room, they knock. When they ask for help, they prepare documents. When they speak, they choose their words more carefully. I haven't raised my voice. I haven't insulted them. I've simply reminded them that a ghost can still own the house it built. Tell me in the comments, if your children forgot your worth, would you forgive in silence, or remind them gently, but firmly, like I did? A week after that family meeting, the air in the house began to shift. It wasn't dramatic, there were no grand apologies, no weeping confessions, but the silence that used to smother me now hung with a different weight. They were uncomfortable. Not because I shouted, but because I didn't. I carried myself the same way I always had, slow steps, quiet mornings, and my usual 2 cups of tea. But now, I noticed the glances. The hesitation before they asked for favors. The way they looked over their shoulders, wondering if I was recording their words. And maybe I was. In my mind, in my spirit, with the same discipline that once made me a teacher everyone respected. Then, one afternoon, the crack appeared. I was sitting in the veranda, sunlight warm on my knees, when Chuka came out with a file in his hand. His face was stiff, but his eyes, they were uncertain. For the first time in years, he didn't look at me like a faded photograph. He looked at me like a man whose foundation had shifted beneath him. "Baba," he began, "I was going through those papers you gave me, the ones showing how much you helped me over the years." I nodded, said nothing. He swallowed hard. I didn't realize it was that much. A pause. A long one. I just assumed, you know, it was what fathers do. I looked at him then. Not with anger, but with a gaze that held every sleepless night, every worn-out pair of shoes, every opportunity one passed up so he wouldn't have to. "Yes," I said softly. "It is what fathers do. But even a well will run dry if no one refills it." He didn't respond right away. His shoulders dropped slightly, the pride in his posture faltering. For once, I saw not the successful businessman, but the boy I carried on my back during the flood in '91, when our street turned to river. That evening, Adiz knocked on my door. She didn't come to take anything this time. She brought soup. Hot. Fresh. With meat. She placed it down and didn't speak for a while. Then, almost like a whisper, "Baba. I'm sorry we haven't made room for you. Not just in the house, but in our lives." That nearly undid me. I nodded, still quiet. My mouth couldn't form words. But my heart, my tired, scarred, weathered heart, felt a faint flutter I hadn't felt in years. Something like dignity. Ibuka came next. He didn't say much. Just sat beside me on the steps one evening and handed me a folded receipt. It was a bank slip. A small repayment, only N50,000, but still, the first time he ever returned anything I gave. We sat there for almost an hour, neither of us speaking. But that silence was different. It wasn't erasure. It was respect. That's when I realized, I didn't need them to cry. I didn't need grand gestures or public apologies. All I needed was for them to see me again. To remember that I was not just an old man who gave. I was the man who built their future, their chances, their comfort. And I had never asked for more than acknowledgement and respect. And slowly, one by one, the truth began to crack through their polished routines and shiny distractions. It came not through confrontation, but through quiet clarity. It turns out, ghosts don't need to scream to be heard. Sometimes, all they have to do is stand still long enough for others to finally face them. It was a Tuesday morning, gray and quiet, the kind of morning where even the birds seem unsure if they should sing. I wore my brown agbada, not for a celebration, but for a statement. That day, I walked into my lawyer's office with a spine straighter than usual, my cane tapping against the tiled floor like a metronome of resolve. I wasn't going to die quietly. I was going to return to the center of the story they tried to write me out of. My lawyer, a patient woman with spectacles that always slid down her nose, looked at the file in front of her and said, "Are you sure about this, sir?" I nodded once. "I'm not doing this to punish them," I said. "I'm doing it so they never forget who they borrowed their future from." She prepared the final drafts, an official addendum to my will, backed by legal clauses and signed receipts. In it, I outlined the truth, itemized, time-stamped, and notarized. I made it clear that my estate would be divided not equally, but justly. Every child who had borrowed, who had promised repayment, who had taken in silence, would receive only what remained after their debts were balanced. No more blind inheritance. No more free rides on the back of a man they claimed was too old to understand finances. That evening, I called them all to the house. Not a request, an instruction. When they arrived, there was no food, no fanfare. Just me, my folder, and their names printed neatly on paper. Chuka arrived first, with his usual confidence, but it faltered when he saw the documents spread out on the table. Adiz came with her husband, whispering already, nervous. Ibuka came last, unusually quiet. I didn't shout. I didn't scold. I simply read from the folder, figures, dates, loan amounts, missed repayments, broken promises. Then I handed each of them a letter with their personal ledger attached. They were stunned. Not just by the detail, but by the fact that I had kept it all, silently, for years. "This is your inheritance," I said. "Adjusted for what you already took." Chuka was the first to speak. "Baba, this feels cold." "No," I said gently. "It feels fair. And fairness is something you all abandoned long ago." Adiz began to cry. Her husband stared at the floor. I leaned on my cane and looked at them one by one. "You called me a burden. But now, you owe the burden you dismissed." For a long time, none of them said anything. Then, slowly, they nodded. One by one. It wasn't anger in their eyes anymore. It wasn't guilt, even. It was recognition. That day, I came back, not as the man waiting quietly in the corner of their lives, but as the pillar I had always been. The banker, the builder, the backbone. They couldn't deny it anymore. They didn't leave angry. They left thoughtful. And that was enough for me. In the days that followed, something remarkable happened. I began to receive calls, not for money, but for advice. For conversation. For help with cooking okra soup, the way Mama used to. Chuka invited me to his son's school play. Adiz brought me fabric to choose for her next event. "I want you to pick, Baba." Like old times. Even Ibuka, he offered to drive me to the hospital for my next checkup. Not because he wanted something. Just because he should have been doing that all along. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't cursed. I had simply come back, with clarity, with quiet strength, and with proof that a man's silence is not the same as his absence. Subscribe if you believe dignity matters more than inheritance, and that every sacrifice deserves to be remembered, not erased. These days, I wake up before the sun. It's become a quiet habit. Old bones rarely sleep long, but I've grown to love those early hours. When the sky is still undecided between night and day, and the only sound is the slow hum of my breath in a room I once built with calloused hands. I sit by the window, the same one my wife used to hang fresh laundry beneath, and I sip my tea. It's not always hot by the time I finish, but it warms me all the same. And outside that window, I watch the street come alive. Children in uniforms, mothers shouting from doorways, the world moving forward. And I sit still. Not because I've been left behind. But because I've arrived. For years, I believed that love from family was something you earned once and kept forever. I thought that if I sacrificed enough, bent enough, stayed quiet long enough, they would always remember. But time taught me a harder truth. Even the deepest wells run dry when no one refills them. They had forgotten me. Not suddenly, but slowly. In skipped greetings. In casual insults. In cold meals and colder stares. But I didn't fade away. I fought my way back. Not with fists or fury, but with dignity. I reclaimed my name. I taught them that respect doesn't retire. That even a father's silence carries weight. And now, though our relationships are not perfect, they are true. Rooted not in expectation, but in recognition. Sometimes Adiz visits with her children. She calls ahead now. She brings fresh fruits and listens to my stories with eyes that no longer drift toward her phone. Chuka sends me updates on his business, he even asks for my thoughts. Not because he needs money, but because he's remembered that his foundation was built by the hands of a teacher. And Ibuka, he comes with less swagger now. More sincerity. He brings bread, sometimes fish. And once, just last week, he sat beside me and said, "Baba, thank you for not giving up on us." That nearly broke me. You see, the greatest victory isn't in revenge. It's in remembrance. To be seen again. To be heard without shouting. To be valued, not because you demand it, but because you deserve it. I walk slower now. My bones ache in the cold. I take more pills than I care to count. But when I close my eyes at night, I don't feel bitter. I feel complete. Because I gave everything I had. And even when they forgot, I did not. Not who I was. Not what I gave. Not what I meant. And now, they remember too. So, if you ever pass by my house in the evening and see a faint glow in the window, know this, it's not just a bulb. It's a signal. That even in old age, even after being called a burden, a man can still stand tall in the home he built, and be seen. The last light in the window isn't flickering. It's shining. Because the man they forgot was me. And I'm still here.